Understanding the Bhagavad-Gita, Part 7, Chapters 15 through 16, taught by Ananta Sesa. Picking up our discussion at verse 15 of Chapter 15, it says, "I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me comes remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas am I to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas." Once again, we have reinforced for us the idea that Krishna is all, is everything, is at the heart of all existence. And this includes the concept of knowledge. In Sri Upanishad, in the opening lines, it tells us that Krishna is the absolute truth. And as such, all wisdom, all knowledge, all understanding is going to come from him and from him alone. Now, as this passage tells us then, this means that all of the knowledge derives from that source, and it enters into us. But just as we have the capacity to remember, we also have the capacity to forget. And this forgetfulness is actually a gift that is granted to us by the divine. Because, given the innumerable amount of lifetimes that each individual lives through, how maddening would it be to have complete memory, complete knowledge of all of that? One would go insane very, very quickly to have to remember all of those different lifetimes. And so through the Lord's mercy, He allows us the gift of forgetfulness, so that when we are reborn into this world, we generally don't have a recollection, we generally don't have a memory of what came before. Krishna, of course, has absolute memory, has absolute knowledge and understanding of everything, from the beginning to the end of existence and from one aspect of the universe to another. He is, as it says here, the knower of the Vedas, the compiler of the Vedas. In essence, Krishna is the Vedas. Chapter 6, verses 16 and 17. There are two classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible, in the material world. Every entity is fallible, and in the spiritual world, every entity is called infallible. Besides these two, there is the greatest living personality, the Lord Himself, who has entered into these worlds and is maintaining them. Well, a common theme throughout philosophy in general is the idea of the fallible and the infallible. Plato taught, for example, that in this material world there was nothing but fallibility, because everything here was part of material creation, material existence, which means that it brought itself into existence and eventually would disappear from existence as if it never were. Knowledge could not be acquired in this world, not real knowledge anyway, because knowledge was something that was based upon observation, was based upon our experience in the world around us. It was empirically derived. And of course, how can you have knowledge of something that's constantly evolving, that's constantly changing? And that's the way of the material world. It's a world that is in constant flux, as Heraclitus had said. But there was another realm, there was another place where absolute knowledge was to be found, where reality was to exist. Plato referred to it as the realm of being. But here we see the distinction being drawn between the material world and the spiritual world within the Bhagavad-Gita. In the material world, everything is fallible for those same reasons that we enumerated before. And in the spiritual world, everything is said to be infallible because it's attained a level of perfection. But aside from these two, which are still part of the material in a sense, which are still part of the created, certainly, there is the Lord Himself. And He is responsible for maintaining everything that exists, for keeping everything that is alive and for maintaining it in every way. Verses 19 and 20. Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is to be understood as the knower of everything, and he therefore engages himself in full devotional service, O son of Bharat. Notice what's being said here, and we've discussed this issue before. A person can engage in Gnan Yoga, they can study the scriptures, they can try to understand through all of these words and all of this language what the Lord ultimately is. But that is only going to get you so far. It will get you to an impersonal understanding like the Mayavadi have of Brahman. But to transcend to that higher level of understanding requires that direct link, that direct connection with Krishna. And we find this through devotional service. We find this through the chanting of the holy names. This is the most confidential part of the Vedic scriptures, O sinless one, and it is disclosed now by me. Whoever understands this will become wise, and his endeavors will know perfection. And so if an individual can come to understand and truly embrace the idea that Krishna is everything, take on this confidential knowledge that only through devotional service is one going to attain that perfection, it will be almost instantaneous. I wanted to read a section from Srimad Bhagavatam. This is Canto 2, Chapter 6, verse 38. It says, "Let us offer our respectful obeisance unto that Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose incarnations and activities are chanted by us for glorification, though he can hardly be fully known as he is." And the first part of Prabhupada's purport says, "It is said that the transcendental name, form, quality, pastime, paraphernalia, personality, and so forth cannot possibly be perceived by the gross materialistic senses. But when the senses are purified by the process of hearing, chanting, remembering, and worshipping the lotus feet of the holy deity, the Lord reveals himself proportionately to the advancement of the quality of the devotional service. One should not expect the Lord to be an order-supplying agent who must be present before us as soon as we desire to see him. We must be ready to undergo the prescribed devotional duties, following the path shown by the predecessor in the disciplic succession from Brahma, Narada, and similar authorities." And so we see through this that the Lord is not always going to be there, is not always going to be present. He doesn't respond specifically to our demands because we are not the ones who are in charge of this universe. He is. But those of us who desire to come to know him, to be in his presence, he will reveal himself based upon your devotion, based upon how much faith and love that you put into your activities, based upon how sincerely you chant the holy names. That's the key to perfection. That's the key to liberation. Moving into chapter 16, we're told about the virtues. The true virtues are fearlessness, purity, charity, restraint, sacrifice, spiritual study, austerity, straightforwardness, non-violence, truth, non-anger, renunciation, peace, compassion, lack of greed, kindness, modesty, vigor, patience, courage, and lack of pride. And we're told that cultivating these virtues leads one towards God. But a lack of these virtues can lead us towards the demonic. And so we should avoid this fate by renouncing desire, anger, and greed. In this section, we see another interesting parallel. The Greek philosopher Aristotle established his virtue ethics in a work called the Nicomachean Ethics. And in that text, he explains that individuals, as he perceives it, are aiming towards or desiring happiness. The road to finding that happiness, which is really a form of contentment, is to cultivate virtues within yourself and to practice those virtues. He said that what made human beings unique amongst all other things was the fact that the human being had a rational thinking mind, which meant that it had the capacity to override its animalistic instincts and desires and to do what is morally correct, to make the moral choice, to do what is virtuous. You talk about the virtue of courage. We look at a firefighter and we think, well, that firefighter is courageous because they run into this burning building when everyone else is trying to flee from it. But in actuality, courage is being displayed there. That virtue is being present. But that doesn't mean that the firefighter doesn't have the same animal instinct, doesn't mean that it doesn't have the desire to flee, or that he doesn't respect the fire. He probably knows better than the rest of us what that fire is capable of. But he overrides those animalistic instincts and operates from his standpoint of duty. That's virtuous behavior. And to an extent, the Bhagavad-Gita may be influential upon Aristotle's teaching. Of course, we never know, and perhaps never will for sure, whether the Vedic knowledge made its way into the Greek world in part or in whole, but it does seem fairly obvious, given how close these different philosophies are, that the Vedic knowledge must have made it in some way, in some form. Because we see, here again, just as we've been talking about with Plato, with Boethius, and now, of course, with Aristotle, there is tremendous similarity in these ideas. We're being told here in chapter 16 of the Gita that we have certain virtues and that we need to cultivate these virtues within ourselves, and that when we act according to our virtue, which is what? Which is obedience to a duty? Which is following our dharma? When we act according to these virtues, we are being led towards God. But when we act according to the vices, when we act in a non-virtuous way, when we allow those animalistic drives and instincts, they're pulling us away from the divine and taking us towards the demonic. They're taking us towards that which is not just animalistic, but in many cases corrupt, and in some instances evil. And so again, what should we be avoiding? Desire, anger, and greed. Those are the major issues. When an individual has desire, longing, wanting for something, it can cause their sensibilities to be led astray. And they will act in horrible ways, corrupt ways, cheating ways, lying ways, in order to get that desire fulfilled. The same thing is true with greed. When a person longs for land, for property, for money, for wealth, for position, that individual is also spending all of that time and that energy trying to acquire it without always thinking about whether it is right to do so or the way they're going about doing it. And of course, anger clearly deludes our senses and pulls us away from doing what is rational, from what is right. And so avoid desire, anger, and greed if you wish to be a virtuous individual and be led towards the divine. At verse 5 it says, the transcendental qualities are conducive to liberation, whereas the demonic qualities make for bondage. Do not worry, O son of Pandu, for you are born with divine qualities. Verses 7 through 9. Those who are demonic do not know what is to be done and what is not to be done. Neither cleanliness, nor proper behavior, nor truth is found in them. They say that this world is unreal, that there is no foundation, and that there is no God in control. It is produced of sex desire and has no cause other than lust. Following such conclusions, the demonic, who are lost to themselves and who have no intelligence, engage in unbeneficial, horrible works meant to destroy the world. This gives us a clear picture of what the demonic individual is going to look like. You know, that individual who has let go of virtue, that individual who is not on the path of Dharma, but rather on the path of adharma, working contrary to their proper stated goals. That person who operates from greed, from anger, from lust, from desire. They will do anything and stop at nothing to achieve that desire. And this is where the corruption, this is where the harm is going to come from. This actually gives us an interesting parallel to a Native American tradition, which comes from Black Elk. Black Elk was a Lakota Sioux of the Oglala band, and when he was about 9 years old, he became ill and fell into a coma for 12 days. Now during that time, he claims to have been transported to another realm and given a great vision. In the vision, he is going to be transported to a rainbow-covered lodge where he meets with the 6 grandfathers, the 4 directions, along with Mother Earth and Father Sky. And each of the grandfathers is going to have a gift and a message to impart upon Black Elk. Well, as the dream progresses, Black Elk begins to look down upon the earth from on high, where he's seated there in that lodge. And he sees the earth growing sick. All the living things of the earth are becoming gaunt, they're becoming poor. The air and the waters have become dirtied and they smell foul. This is a good depiction of what was happening in Black Elk's day. It's a good depiction of what's happening even to this day. Individuals in their greed are aiming for fulfilling their goals no matter what the cost. These individuals are driving forward and pushing forward to acquire more and more wealth, more power, more prestige, more position. And in doing so, they're not thinking about the consequences. They're not considering all of the problems that are being caused and how the earth is irrevocably being harmed. You know, in the 1930s, John Neidhart went to the reservation and spoke with the aged Black Elk. And he wrote a biography of Black Elk called Black Elk Speaks. Anyway, in that text, he tells us that, you know, in the 1860s, when Black Elk was a boy, he'd never seen a white settler. But when gold was discovered in the Black Hills, there was a huge flood of these people who came into this territory. And they began to desecrate these sacred mountains, these sacred lands, in order to attain wealth, gold. And the Oglala, they looked at these people and they thought they were crazy. These crazy Wasishu, these crazy foreigners. Why are you up here after this yellow metal? What good is it? You can't make tools out of it. It's too soft. You know, yeah, it's kind of shiny and pretty, okay. Maybe it adorns, earring or something, but it serves no practical value, no practical purpose. Why are you driven mad by it? Why are you desecrating our land because of it? But because of that greed for power and position, the natives are going to be cast off of their land and placed onto these reservations. And a whole way of life kind of goes by the wayside in the name of greed. The land becomes desecrated. The land becomes destroyed. Well, in this vision that he has, he's seeing the earth becoming foul and smelly and disgusting and so forth. And Black Elk, when he looks down, he sees a blue man who's lying there empowering this sickness. And 4 horses charged at the blue man, but they were beaten back. And the grandfathers, they called upon Black Elk to kill this blue man. And so Black Elk takes his bow out, and his bow is transformed into a spear, and he kills the blue man. And when the blue man falls, life is renewed, and everything becomes healthy and fresh again. Now the blue man represents those people who want to harm the earth, or who are at least willing to in the name of greed. And this is what the blue man symbolizes. He symbolizes greed, corruption, dishonesty, selfishness. Now note the skin color, blue. Blue is chosen in this story because it's not red, yellow, black, or white. And the point here is that no one group is the blue man. The blue man can be found in any culture and is responsible for the illness there. So we need to find a way, no matter what culture, no matter what background we are in, we need to find a way of defeating the blue man. And underlying everything are those elements of anger, greed, and desire. So if we can eradicate those 3 underlying symptoms, we could destroy the blue man forever. And so what we learn through the legend and the story of Black Elk is also what we're being told here within the Gita. To respect the land that we live upon. To take care of it. Because it is a gift from God. Moving on to slokas 13 through 15, it says, the demonic person thinks, so much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes. So much is mine now, and it will increase in the future. More and more he is my enemy, and I have killed him, and my other enemy will also be killed. I am the Lord of everything. I am the enjoyer. I am perfect, powerful, and happy. I am the richest man, surrounded by aristocratic relatives, and there is none so powerful and happy as I am. I shall perform sacrifices. I shall give some charity, and thus I shall rejoice. In this way such persons are deluded by ignorance. Verses 21 through 24 tells us that there are 3 gates leading to this hell: lust, anger, and greed. Every sane man should give these up, for they lead to the degradation of the soul. The man who has escaped these 3 gates of hell, O son of Kunti, performs acts conducive to self-realization, and thus gradually attains the supreme destination. But he who discards scriptural injunctions and acts according to his own whims attains neither perfection, nor happiness, nor the supreme destination. One should understand what is duty and what is not duty by the regulations of the Scripture. Knowing such rules and regulations, one should act so that he may gradually be elevated. And so we're reminded once again that the gates to hell are lust, anger, and greed, and that if we come to realize this and eliminate those things within our life, then we can be elevated. We can attain that perfection and go on to serve God. But if we neglect this, if we maintain those gates, we keep those gates open, then the further that we build into them, The more anger that we get in our life, the more greed, the more lust, the more desire that there is, the wider those gates are flung open. There's the story of a samurai who is wandering through the woods, and he comes across this mendicant, and he asks him very arrogantly, "What do you foresee for me? Am I going to go to heaven, or am I going to go to hell?" And the mendicant looks at him and judges from him, and he begins to make fun of him. He jokes with him, but he's making fun of him. He's ridiculing this samurai. And the samurai's anger becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, until finally he draws his sword on the mendicant. And he says, "Ah, you've just opened the gates to hell." Now the samurai eventually comes to realize what the mendicant was doing. And he puts the sword away, and he bows humbly before the man and apologizes for his actions, offers his obeisances. And the mendicant says, "Now you've opened the gates to heaven." And so we have to understand the difference between what action is going to take us towards what is right and what action is going to take us towards what is wrong. We need to understand what these strong, powerful emotions such as lust, anger, and greed are going to do to us, so that we can avoid those things and close those gates of hell. We want to attain the supreme destination, and we're not going to do that as long as we're attached and fixated to these material desires and drives. And so once again, as we come to a close to this week's lecture, I want to remind everyone, if you haven't done so yet, please pick up a copy of Bhagavad-Gita as it is and begin reading through it. It is an incredible text. It is a life-changing text. What I'm doing with these lectures is only scratching the barest surface of what is there within those scriptures. And so it is not enough. Use them to encourage you to read. Use them to help you understand some key concepts. But pick up that text and read it, please. Hare Krishna.